Hello, and welcome back to Code Your English, the place where you can learn English easily and grow smartly with every single episode. I want you to try something for me before we even start. Just for a second, think about your day yesterday. Not last week, not last year, just yesterday. How many things were pulling at your attention at the same time? Maybe you were checking your phone while eating breakfast. Maybe you were listening to music while walking to work, and at the same time, thinking about an email you forgot to send. Maybe you were lying in bed at night, completely exhausted, but your mind was still racing, still going over everything that happened during the day. If that sounds familiar, you are definitely not alone. In fact, you're part of what feels like a global club. A club that nobody really wants to join, but almost everyone somehow ends up in. The club of people who feel constantly stressed, constantly tired, and constantly like there just isn't enough time. So today, I want to talk about something that affects almost every single one of us, whether we live in a big city or a small town, whether we're students, parents, or professionals. I want to talk about why modern humans are so stressed. And I don't mean this in a boring scientific way. I mean this in a real way, the way you might talk about it with a close friend over a cup of coffee. By the end of this episode, I hope you'll understand a bit more about where this stress actually comes from. Not just the obvious reasons, like having too much work, but some deeper reasons that most people never really stop to think about. And along the way, we're going to pick up some really useful English expressions. The kind of natural phrases that native speakers use all the time when they talk about feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, or burnt out. So stay with me until the end, because I promise this is going to be a conversation worth having. And here's something else I want you to keep in mind while we go through this together. This episode isn't just about English learning, even though, of course, that's a big part of why you're here. It's also, in a way, about understanding yourself a little better. Language and psychology are more connected than people realize. When you learn the right words to describe how you feel, words like overwhelmed, burnt out, or on edge, something interesting happens. You start to understand your own emotions more clearly. It's much easier to deal with a feeling once you can actually name it, instead of just carrying around this vague, uncomfortable sense that something isn't quite right. So today, we're going to do two things at the same time. Build your English and build a little bit of self-awareness. Not a bad combination for one podcast episode, right? Before we jump into the main ideas, let's take a moment to ask a simple question. Why does this even matter? I mean, humans have always faced difficulties, right? Our ancestors dealt with hunger, danger, and uncertainty every single day. So why does it feel like we, with all our comfort and technology, are somehow more stressed than ever before? Here's the thing. Stress itself isn't new. What's new is the type of stress we experience, and more importantly, how constant it has become. In the past, stress usually came in short, intense bursts. You'd face a dangerous situation, maybe a wild animal, maybe a lack of food. Your body would react, and then, once the danger passed, your body would return to a calm state. This is what scientists sometimes call acute stress. It comes, it does its job, and then it goes away. But today, many of us live in a state of what's called chronic stress. That means the stress doesn't really go away. It just stays there, quietly, in the background, day after day. You might not even notice it directly, but it shows up in other ways. Trouble sleeping, feeling irritable, having a hard time concentrating, or just this general sense that you can never fully relax. And this matters because chronic stress doesn't just affect your mood. Over time, It can affect your physical health, your relationships, and your overall quality of life. So understanding where this stress comes from isn't just an interesting topic to think about. It's actually something that can help you live a healthier, calmer life. There's another reason this topic feels so important to me right now. I've noticed, both in my own life and in conversations with friends, family, and even students I've taught, that stress has almost become the default setting for modern life. It's not something unusual anymore. It's something we almost expect. If someone tells you they feel completely calm, relaxed, and unbothered by anything, your first reaction might actually be surprise, maybe even a little disbelief. That, in itself, tells you something important about where we are as a society. We've normalized a level of stress that, honestly, our bodies and minds were never really designed to handle on a daily, ongoing basis. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote about the idea that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, meaning that so much of our stress comes not from what's actually happening to us, but from what we imagine might happen, or from how we interpret events in our minds. That idea, written almost 2,000 years ago, feels strangely modern, doesn't it? Because so much of today's stress isn't caused by immediate physical danger. It's caused by thoughts, by pressure, by expectations. Things that exist mainly in our minds, yet feel completely real to us. Let's take a closer look at where all of this comes from. Main idea 1. We are constantly connected, and that comes with a cost. I want to start with the most obvious one, but also the one that's easy to underestimate: our constant connection to technology. Think about your smartphone for a second. It's probably somewhere near you right now, maybe in your pocket, maybe on the table next to you. And that little device has completely changed the way we live. On one hand, it's amazing. You can talk to someone on the other side of the world in seconds. You can find any piece of information you want in a matter of moments. You can order food, book a taxi, or manage your money, all from one small screen. But here's the interesting part. This same device that gives us so much convenience is also one of the biggest sources of stress in our daily lives. Why? Well, think about notifications. Every time your phone buzzes or lights up, your brain has to make a tiny decision. Should I check this now or later? And even if you decide to ignore it, a part of your brain is still thinking about it. Multiply that by 50 or 100 notifications a day, and you start to understand why so many people feel mentally exhausted by the end of the day, even if they haven't done anything physically tiring. There's also something psychologists call FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. This is that uncomfortable feeling you get when you see other people's lives on social media, their vacations, their achievements, their exciting weekends, and you start comparing your own life to theirs, even if you know, logically, that people usually only share the best parts of their lives online. It's hard not to feel a little bit of pressure, a little bit of anxiety, when you're constantly exposed to everyone else's highlight reel. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you had a completely normal, quiet weekend. You stayed home, relaxed, maybe watched a movie or read a book. Nothing wrong with that at all. It sounds pretty nice, actually. But then you open your phone and you see photos of friends traveling to a beautiful beach or attending an exciting party. Suddenly, your calm, relaxing weekend starts to feel boring, or even like you did something wrong. That's the strange power of constant connection. It can turn something perfectly fine into something that feels not good enough. One thing I've noticed, both in myself and in people I've talked to, is that we've lost the habit of being unavailable. In the past, if you left the house, people simply couldn't reach you until you got back. There was a natural break, a natural pause. Nowadays, we're expected to be reachable all the time, by our boss, our friends, our family. And that expectation, even if nobody says it directly, creates a low, constant hum of pressure in the background of our lives. There's also a term worth knowing here: digital overload. This simply means the feeling of having too much digital information coming at you at once. Messages, emails, videos, notifications, all competing for your attention at the same time. And unlike physical tiredness, which you can usually solve with rest, digital overload is trickier, because even when you're resting, you're often still scrolling, still absorbing information, still keeping your brain active in a way that doesn't actually feel restful at all. Let me share a small, personal observation here. I've noticed that many people, myself included at times, pick up their phone almost automatically, without even really deciding to. You finish one task, and before you've even thought about it, your hand is already reaching for your phone. It's become such an automatic habit that we barely notice we're doing it. And that's exactly what makes it so powerful, and, honestly, a little concerning. When something becomes automatic, it stops being a choice, and it starts being a default behavior that quietly shapes our mental state throughout the day. So, what can we learn from this first idea? I think the key takeaway is that being constantly connected isn't automatically a bad thing, but being constantly available can be exhausting. There's a difference between using technology as a tool and letting technology control your attention every single moment of the day. And recognizing that difference, even just noticing it, is often the first step toward feeling a little less overwhelmed. Main idea 2. We're doing more, but we don't feel like we're doing enough. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but people have always been busy. What's different now? That's a fair question, and it brings us to our second main idea: the strange feeling of doing more than ever before, while somehow still feeling like it's not enough. Here's something interesting. Studies have shown that, in many developed countries, people today often have more free time on paper than people did several decades ago. And yet, most people report feeling busier, more rushed, and more overwhelmed than ever. How can both of these things be true at the same time? I think the answer lies in something called time pressure. Not necessarily having less time, but feeling like you have less time. And a big part of this comes from the sheer number of choices and responsibilities we juggle every day. In the past, many people had one job, one clear role, and fewer decisions to make on a daily basis. Today, we're expected to be productive at work, maintain an active social life, exercise regularly, eat healthily, keep up with the news, learn new skills, and somehow also find time to relax. It's a lot. There's also a cultural element here. In many modern societies, especially in fast-paced cities, being busy has almost become a badge of honor. Have you ever noticed how, when someone asks, "How are you?" a very common answer is "busy, but good," or "so busy, you have no idea." Being busy has started to feel like proof that you're important, that you're successful, that you matter. And this creates a strange pressure to always appear busy, even when, deep down, we're exhausted and wish we could slow down. For example, imagine two friends meeting for coffee. One of them casually mentions, "Oh, I've had such a relaxed week. Nothing much going on." Instead of feeling happy for that person, many people today would actually feel a little bit of secret judgment, thinking something like, "Really? Nothing going on?" That seems unusual. We've built a culture where rest can almost feel like something to apologize for. On the other hand, this constant pressure to do more often leads to something called productivity guilt. This is that uncomfortable feeling you get when you're not being productive, even during your free time. Maybe you're lying on the sofa, trying to relax after a long week, but instead of actually relaxing, your mind keeps whispering, "You should be doing something useful right now." That voice, that constant inner pressure, is exhausting in itself, completely separate from the actual work you're doing. There's a researcher named Anders Ericsson who spent much of his career studying how people become experts in their fields. One of his key findings was that quality of effort matters far more than quantity of hours. In other words, working longer doesn't automatically mean working better, and being busier doesn't automatically mean being more effective. Yet, in modern culture, we often measure our worth by how full our schedule looks, rather than by how meaningful or effective our time actually was. That's a subtle but important difference, and it's one that I think contributes enormously to unnecessary stress. Here's another angle worth considering. Many of us have been taught, whether directly or indirectly, that rest needs to be earned. You're only allowed to relax once everything on your to-do list is finished. The problem, of course, is that in modern life, the to-do list never truly finishes. There's always one more email, one more task, one more thing you could be doing. So if you're waiting for the perfect moment when everything is done before you allow yourself to rest, you might end up waiting forever, all while your stress levels quietly build up in the background. So, what can we take from this? I think it's worth asking yourself honestly, how much of your stress comes from what you actually need to do? And how much comes from what you think you should be doing, based on how busy everyone around you seems to be? That's a question worth sitting with for a moment. Main idea 3. Comparison has become almost impossible to avoid. This third idea connects closely to the first two, but it deserves its own space because I think it's one of the deepest sources of modern stress: constant comparison. Human beings have always compared themselves to others. That's not new. In the past, though, most people only compared themselves to the people around them. Neighbors, co-workers, classmates, family members. Your reference group, so to speak, was relatively small and local. Today, thanks to social media and the internet, our reference group has expanded to include, well, basically everyone. Think about it this way. If you're learning a new skill, let's say cooking, or playing guitar, or even learning English, you're no longer just comparing yourself to your classmates or your neighbors. You're comparing yourself to the best chefs in the world, the most talented musicians, or the most fluent English speakers, all of whom you can watch on video within seconds. And while this can be inspiring, it can also be incredibly discouraging, because you're comparing your beginning to someone else's years, or even decades, of experience and practice. There's a well-known idea from psychologist Carol Dweck about something called a growth mindset, which basically means believing that your abilities can improve through effort and practice, rather than believing that talent is fixed from birth. And I think this idea is more important now than ever, precisely because constant comparison can easily push us toward the opposite way of thinking. A fixed mindset, where we look at someone who's already skilled and think, "I could never be that good," instead of thinking, "I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way." Let me give you a very relatable example. Imagine someone who just started going to the gym. In their first week, they might feel proud of simply showing up, of doing their best. But then, they open social media and see fitness influencers with years of training, incredible results, and seemingly perfect routines. Instead of feeling proud of their own small progress, they start to feel like their effort doesn't even count, like they're somehow behind, even though they just started. This kind of comparison creates a very specific type of stress, not the stress of having too much to do, but the stress of never feeling good enough, no matter how much you actually achieve. And here's the tricky part. This stress is often invisible. Nobody around you knows you're comparing yourself to a stranger on the internet. You carry it quietly, and over time, it can really affect your confidence and your mental energy. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who spent decades studying how people think and make decisions, showed that humans are naturally wired to compare, to judge, and to evaluate constantly, often without even realizing they're doing it. This isn't a personal weakness. It's simply how the human brain works. The issue isn't that we compare ourselves to others. The issue is the sheer scale of comparison we now face thanks to technology. Our brains evolved to compare ourselves with a small group of people around us, not with millions of curated, carefully chosen images from strangers across the entire planet. Another thing worth mentioning here is the difference between what we might call inspiration and intimidation. Sometimes, seeing someone else's success can genuinely motivate us, pushing us to work harder or dream bigger. But other times, that same content can leave us feeling small, discouraged, or not good enough. The line between these two reactions is often thinner than we think, and it depends a lot on our mindset in that particular moment. Recognizing which one you're experiencing, inspiration or intimidation, can be a powerful first step toward managing this kind of stress. So, what can we learn from this? I think one powerful shift is learning to compare yourself to your own past self, rather than to strangers online. Are you a little better than you were last month? Do you understand a little more than you did last year? That comparison, unlike comparison with others, is actually fair because it's based on your own starting point, your own journey, your own effort. Main idea 4. We've lost some of our natural rhythms. Now let's talk about something a little different, but still deeply connected to modern stress. The loss of natural rhythms in our daily lives. For most of human history, life followed the rhythm of nature. People woke up with the sunlight and went to sleep when it got dark. Work often followed the seasons, busier during harvest time, quieter during winter. There were natural periods of rest built into life itself. Today, that natural rhythm has almost completely disappeared, especially for people living in cities. We have artificial lighting, so we can stay awake long after the sun goes down. We have screens that keep our brains stimulated late into the night. We work indoors, often without much natural light at all, and many of us barely notice the change of seasons because our daily routine looks almost identical in summer and in winter. This might not sound like an obvious cause of stress, but it actually has a huge effect on our bodies and minds. Our bodies have something called a circadian rhythm, basically an internal clock that regulates when we feel awake and when we feel sleepy. When this rhythm gets disrupted, for example by staring at bright screens late at night, or by irregular sleep schedules, our stress levels naturally increase because our bodies are constantly trying to adjust to signals that don't match the natural pattern they're designed for. For example, think about how different you feel after a good night's sleep, compared to a night where you scrolled through your phone until 2 in the morning and then had to wake up early. It's not just about feeling tired. Poor sleep genuinely increases your stress hormones, makes you more emotionally reactive, and reduces your ability to handle difficult situations calmly. On the other hand, when people spend time outdoors, in natural light, moving their bodies, and following a more regular daily rhythm, their stress levels tend to drop noticeably. This is one of the reasons why simple habits, like taking a short walk outside in the morning or avoiding screens right before bed, can have a surprisingly powerful effect on how stressed we feel, even without changing anything else about our busy schedules. There's a reason so many wellness experts and doctors keep repeating the same simple advice. Get outside, move your body, keep a regular sleep schedule. It might sound almost too simple to actually matter, especially when we live in such a complicated world, but our bodies haven't changed nearly as fast as our environment has. Biologically, we're still very similar to humans who lived thousands of years ago, following the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. Our environment, on the other hand, has changed dramatically in just the last 100 years or so. That mismatch between our ancient biology and our modern environment is a big part of why simple lifestyle habits can have such a surprisingly strong effect on stress. I remember reading somewhere that even something as small as getting natural sunlight within the first hour of waking up can help regulate your body's internal clock and improve your mood throughout the day. It sounds almost too simple to be true, and yet, when you think about how disconnected many of us are from natural light, spending our days indoors under artificial lighting, staring at screens, it starts to make a lot of sense why reconnecting with these basic, natural rhythms can feel so genuinely refreshing. So, what's the takeaway here? I think it's this. A lot of our stress isn't just psychological. It's also physical, connected to how disconnected we've become from natural rhythms that our bodies still expect, even in our modern artificial world. Main idea 5. We rarely allow ourselves to feel bored. This last idea might surprise you a little, but I think it's one of the most overlooked reasons behind modern stress. We've almost completely eliminated boredom from our lives, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Think about the last time you were truly bored. Not for a few seconds, but for an extended period, with absolutely nothing to distract you. It's actually hard to remember, isn't it? That's because, with a smartphone in our pocket, we can fill every single quiet moment with something. Scrolling, watching, listening, reading. Waiting in line at the store? Check your phone. Waiting for a bus? Check your phone. Even a short elevator ride now often comes with a quick glance at a screen. Here's the interesting part, though. Boredom, as uncomfortable as it feels, actually plays an important role in mental relaxation and creativity. When your brain isn't constantly receiving new information, it gets a chance to process everything that's already happened, to relax, to reflect, and even to come up with new, creative ideas. By removing boredom completely from our lives, we've also removed one of the brain's natural ways of recovering from stress. Let me give you an example. Have you ever noticed that some of your best ideas come to you in the shower, or while going for a walk without your phone, or just before falling asleep? That's not a coincidence. Those are some of the few remaining moments in modern life where your brain isn't being constantly stimulated, and it finally has space to think freely, to make new connections, and to relax. By constantly filling every spare moment with stimulation, we're actually depriving our brains of the downtime they need to recover from daily stress. It's a little bit like a muscle that never gets a chance to rest. Eventually, it becomes tired and less effective, even if it's technically working all the time. So, what can we take from this final point? Maybe, every once in a while, it's worth allowing yourself to feel a little bored, on purpose. Leave your phone in another room for 20 minutes. Take a walk without any music or podcast playing. Let your mind wander a little. It might feel strange at first, especially if you're used to constant stimulation, but over time, it can become one of the simplest and most effective ways to reduce stress. Main idea 6. We face far more decisions than our ancestors ever did. There's one more idea I want to share with you before we move toward the end, because I think it's often overlooked, even though it quietly affects us every single day. The sheer number of decisions we're expected to make. Think about something as simple as choosing what to watch tonight. A few decades ago, if you turned on the television, you might have had a handful of channels to choose from. Today, you're faced with an almost endless list of shows, movies, and platforms. And, ironically, many people spend more time scrolling through options than actually watching anything. This might seem like a small, unimportant example, but it actually reflects something much bigger happening across nearly every part of modern life. Psychologists have a term for this: decision fatigue. This basically means that the more decisions you make throughout the day, the more mentally tired you become, and the harder it gets to make good decisions later on. And when you think about how many small decisions we make every day, what to wear, what to eat, which message to reply to first, which task to prioritize, which route to take to avoid traffic, it starts to add up to a surprising amount of mental effort, even before we get to the bigger, more important decisions in our lives. On the other hand, in the past, many of these choices simply didn't exist. People often wore similar clothes throughout the week, ate similar meals, and followed fairly predictable daily routines. That might sound a little boring compared to the freedom we have today, and in many ways it was more limited. But it also meant far less mental energy spent on constant decision-making, leaving more energy available for the things that actually mattered. For example, imagine trying to choose a restaurant for dinner using a delivery app. Instead of simply feeling hungry and eating something reasonable, you might spend 15 or 20 minutes scrolling through hundreds of options, reading reviews, comparing prices, and still somehow feel unsatisfied with whatever you eventually choose. That entire process, even though it seems small, adds a surprising amount of mental strain to your day. Strain that quietly builds up alongside everything else we've already talked about. So, what can we take from this final main idea? Sometimes, having fewer choices or deliberately simplifying certain decisions in your life isn't a limitation. It's actually a form of relief. Some of the most successful and productive people intentionally simplify small, unimportant decisions, like what to wear or what to eat. Precisely so, they have more mental energy left for the decisions that truly matter. Now, let's pause and reflect together. Before we move toward the end of this episode, I want to ask you a few questions. You don't need to answer out loud, obviously. Just take a moment to think about them honestly. First question: when was the last time you went a full hour without checking your phone, just because you wanted to, not because you had to? Second question: how often do you compare yourself to people you've never even met in real life, whether on social media or elsewhere online? And third question: do you remember the last time you allowed yourself to feel genuinely bored, without immediately reaching for a distraction? I think these questions are worth sitting with, because the answers often reveal a lot about where our stress is really coming from. It's rarely just about having too much to do. It's often about how connected, how compared, and how constantly stimulated we've become. Here's one more question, and maybe the most important one. If you removed all the external pressure right now, the notifications, the comparisons, the endless choices, what would actually feel calm to you? Take a second and really picture it. For some people, it might be a quiet walk outside. For others, it might be simply sitting somewhere without needing to check anything at all. Whatever image came to your mind just now, hold on to it, because that's probably a pretty good clue about what your mind and body are actually asking for. Bringing it all together. So let's quickly summarize everything we've talked about today. We looked at 6 connected reasons why modern humans experience so much stress. Our constant digital connection, the pressure to always be doing more, the endless comparison made possible by social media, the loss of our natural daily rhythms, the disappearance of simple boredom from our everyday lives, and the overwhelming number of decisions we face every single day. None of these ideas are meant to make you feel guilty, by the way. We didn't choose most of these conditions. They're simply part of the world we live in today. But understanding them is powerful, because once you recognize where your stress is actually coming from, you can start making small, realistic changes. Maybe that means putting your phone away for an hour in the evening. Maybe that means being a little kinder to yourself when you compare your progress to others. Maybe it just means allowing yourself a few quiet, boring minutes during your day, without feeling like you need to fill them with something. When you think about it, our ancestors dealt with very real, very physical dangers. We deal with something quieter, but in some ways just as powerful. A constant, low-level pressure that comes from living in a world that never really switches off. And maybe that's exactly why learning to switch off, even briefly, has become one of the most important skills of modern life. I really hope this episode gave you something to think about. And of course, along the way, gave you some useful English expressions you can use in real conversations. Things like chronic stress, burnt out, fear of missing out, productivity guilt, and growth mindset. Try using one of them today, in a sentence about your own life. That's the fastest way to make new vocabulary truly stick. There's a well-known quote often attributed to the poet Rumi, who wrote about the idea that you were born with wings, so why prefer to crawl through life? I love that image, because I think it captures something important about stress. Stress can make us feel small, stuck, and limited, as if we're crawling through our days just trying to survive them. But the goal isn't to eliminate every difficulty from your life. That's simply not realistic. The goal is to learn how to fly a little more often than you crawl, to find those small, achievable moments of calm within an otherwise busy, demanding world. None of the ideas we discussed today require a complete lifestyle change overnight. In fact, I'd actually encourage you to avoid trying to fix everything at once, because that, ironically, would just create even more stress. Instead, maybe pick just one small idea from today's episode. Maybe it's putting your phone in another room during dinner. Maybe it's taking a short walk outside without any screen in your hand. Maybe it's simply noticing the next time you're comparing yourself to someone else and gently reminding yourself that you're only seeing a small, curated piece of their life, not the whole story. Small changes, repeated consistently, tend to matter far more than big changes that don't last. That's true for managing stress, and honestly, it's true for learning English as well. So, the next time you notice yourself feeling stressed, overwhelmed, or burnt out, try pausing for just a moment and asking yourself which of these 6 factors might be playing a role in that moment. Simply noticing it, simply naming it, can already start to loosen its grip on you. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If this episode made you think, even just a little, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Take care of yourself, be kind to your mind, and I'll see you in the next episode.